In 1930, the Meuse Valley in Belgium was a narrow corridor of industrial power. Stretching along the Meuse River near Liège, the valley was home to a staggering concentration of factories, each contributing to Belgium's rapid economic growth. There were iron mills belching smoke, smelters glowing red with molten metal, coke ovens, glassworks, and chemical plants producing everything from fertilizer to explosives. In total, 27 major factories operated day and night, creating a dense layer of industrial emissions that hovered over the valley. For the people living there, smokestacks were a familiar sight, symbols of employment and prosperity, but the valley had a long history of air pollution complaints. As early as the 19th century, locals had raised concerns about the noxious fumes that blanketed their homes and fields. In 1911, a similar fog had settled in a nearby valley, killing livestock and serving as a warning of what stagnant air mixed with industrial emissions could do. Yet despite these warnings, authorities largely overlooked the risk in the pursuit of industrial productivity. By the winter of 1930, the stage was set for disaster. The valley's geography, a narrow, low-lying area bordered by hills, trapped air and pollutants, with minimal wind and a high concentration of toxic gases being released daily. The conditions were increasingly hazardous. Residents went about their routines, unaware that the combination of industry, geography, and weather was creating a toxic environment. The air they breathed each day was already laced with dangerous chemicals, but no one could predict that a perfect storm of weather and pollution was about to turn the valley into a death trap. This industrial landscape was not only a hub of human activity, but also a ticking time bomb. Every smokestack contributed to a growing cloud of sulfur dioxide, particulate matter, and other harmful chemicals. People and animals alike were exposed daily, with subtle health effects going largely unnoticed. For decades, the Meuse Valley had been a center of progress and innovation, but in December 1930, it would become the epicenter of one of the first scientifically documented air pollution disasters in modern history. The disaster began on December 1st, 1930, when a cold, damp fog settled over the Meuse Valley. Thick and motionless, it might have seemed ordinary at first, but this fog coincided with a rare weather phenomenon known as a thermal inversion. Normally, warm air rises and carries pollutants away, but during an inversion, a layer of warmer air traps colder air near the ground. With little to no wind, the valley's air became stagnant, effectively sealing in all the emissions from the factories below. By December 2nd, the fog had grown heavier and more acrid. Smoke and chemical fumes from the 27 factories, including sulfur dioxide, particulate matter, and other industrial pollutants, were trapped under the inversion. Residents began to notice irritation in their throats, persistent coughing, and a burning sensation in their lungs. Animals in the area became distressed, livestock struggled to breathe, and many farmers moved them to higher ground in hopes of avoiding the toxic air. By December 3rd, the fog had become a lethal chemical soup. People were collapsing in their homes, struggling for every breath. Hospitals were overwhelmed, with physicians unable to provide adequate care to the growing number of patients suffering from respiratory distress. Panic spread quickly. Newspapers described the fog with names like the Black Death, and the region was referred to as the Valley of Death in reports that tried to capture the horror of the moment. The peak of the crisis occurred between December 3rd and 5th. Within this short period, 63 people had died, the majority of them in Engis, the valley's most industrialized town. Victims were primarily the elderly or those with pre-existing heart and lung conditions, but the deadly fog did not discriminate entirely. The youngest known victim was a 20-year-old woman named Louise Dams, who collapsed and died while walking home from a social gathering. Beyond the fatalities, an estimated 6,000 people suffered serious respiratory problems. The Meuse Valley, a symbol of industrial progress, had become a corridor of sudden and devastating human suffering. After December 6th, when the fog finally lifted, experts began piecing together the cause of the Meuse Valley disaster. Authorities initially had no idea what had killed dozens of residents so quickly. Some newspapers speculated wildly about foreign gas attacks or new epidemics, while others assumed it was merely a freak weather event. The government quickly organized a scientific investigation, sending teams to perform autopsies and collect environmental samples. Autopsies revealed that victims showed no signs of systemic poisoning. Instead, their lungs were filled with fluid, a condition known as pulmonary edema, indicating they had essentially drowned in the air they were breathing. The airways were congested with mucus, and the damage was concentrated in the respiratory system rather than internal organs. This pointed investigators toward inhaled toxins rather than an ingested or bloodborne poison. Chemical analysis confirmed that the fog had become a lethal cocktail of industrial pollutants. Sulfur dioxide, a byproduct of coal combustion common in the valley's iron and smelting plants, was the primary culprit. When mixed with water vapor in the dense fog, it formed sulfuric acid aerosol, which severely damaged lung tissue. Investigators also considered the role of fluorine gas, produced by at least 15 of the valley's factories. Danish scientist Kai Roholt, a leading expert on fluorine, argued that it may have contributed to the deaths, though this view remained contested. The investigation concluded that the perfect storm of circumstances, a thermal inversion, stagnant fog, and continuous emissions from factories, had transformed the valley's air into a corrosive and deadly substance. For the first time, scientists had documented an acute air pollution event that killed people almost instantly, providing crucial evidence that industrial emissions could have catastrophic health consequences when combined with specific weather conditions. This investigation laid the groundwork for later studies on industrial air pollution and public health regulations worldwide. The Meuse Valley disaster left a lasting mark on environmental science and public health, even though the factories themselves were never held legally responsible. The official explanation at the time labeled the tragedy as an act of God, attributing it to a rare combination of weather events and industrial emissions. Yet the scientific findings could not be ignored. For the first time, it was proven that acute air pollution from industrial activity could kill large numbers of people in a very short period. The event became a turning point for air quality research. Scientists emphasized the role of sulfur dioxide and other industrial pollutants in creating lethal conditions during thermal inversions. Public health authorities began to study the impacts of industrial emissions more seriously, recognizing that densely populated industrial regions were particularly vulnerable to similar incidents. This awareness slowly led to the creation of monitoring programs designed to prevent future disasters. The Meuse Valley disaster also served as a chilling warning for other industrialized cities. Less than 2 decades later, in 1948, a nearly identical event occurred in Donora, Pennsylvania, where 20 people died and thousands were sickened by a smog of industrial pollutants trapped by weather conditions. In 1952, London faced the Great Smog, which killed thousands and affected an entire metropolis. Scientists later traced these disasters back to lessons learned in 1930, noting that the combination of stagnant air, industrial emissions, and urban populations could be deadly. In Angus, Belgium, the town most affected by the disaster, a memorial plaque and statue were erected in 2000 to commemorate the victims, ensuring that the event would not be forgotten. The lessons of the Meuse Valley helped shape modern air pollution regulations, demonstrating the importance of industrial oversight and environmental monitoring. The disaster showed that the pursuit of industrial progress without attention to safety could have lethal consequences, and that science and public policy must work hand in hand to protect human life. Ultimately, the Meuse Valley disaster became the first documented example of how industrial pollution could rapidly escalate into a public health crisis. It reminded the world that the air we breathe is not just a background element, it is a vital component of survival, and neglecting its safety can turn progress into tragedy. By the time the fog finally lifted on December 6, 1930, the immediate crisis in the Meuse Valley had passed, but its implications were far from over. 63 people had lost their lives, thousands more had suffered serious respiratory illness, and entire communities were left shaken by the invisible threat that had swept through the industrial towns. The disaster highlighted the deadly intersection of human activity and natural conditions, proving that even modern, bustling industrial regions were vulnerable to unforeseen environmental hazards. In the aftermath, the tragedy prompted governments, scientists, and public health officials to rethink how industrial emissions were managed. And although the factories were never legally punished, the evidence gathered during the investigation laid the groundwork for modern air quality monitoring and environmental regulation. The event demonstrated the importance of considering the cumulative effects of industrial pollutants, particularly in areas where weather patterns could trap toxic air close to the ground. The Meuse Valley disaster also shaped public awareness. people began to recognize that clean air was not merely a luxury, but a necessity for life. Schools, hospitals, and municipal authorities started taking precautions during severe weather events, and scientific research into air pollution accelerated. The incident became a cautionary tale, showing that neglecting environmental health could have catastrophic consequences, and that proactive measures were essential to prevent similar events. Subsequent pollution disasters, including the smog in Donora, Pennsylvania in 1948 and the Great Smog of London in 1952, echoed the Meuse Valley tragedy. These events reinforced the understanding that industrialized societies needed to balance economic progress with public safety, and that legislation and monitoring were vital to protect communities from preventable hazards. Today, the Meuse Valley disaster remains a historical reminder of the fragile relationship between human industry and natural forces. It stands as both a warning and a lesson. Even a relatively small valley, packed with factories and subject to unusual weather, can become a deadly trap. The 63 lives lost and the thousands affected continue to remind us of the human cost of ignoring environmental risks. Through memorials in Anguisse and ongoing scientific study, the Meuse Valley disaster endures as a pivotal moment in the history of industrial safety, public health, and environmental awareness.